All right. Welcome to today's show. Thanks for joining me in what is likely to be a lively chat about Tucker Carlson and the disinformation bubble that is comprised of not only Fox News Media, OAN, Newsmax, Sinclair stations, etc., but is propped up and supported by Russian loyalists like Senator Ron Johnson, currently or recently appearing in a Senate hearing about the attack on America's Capitol, who's been pushing the fabrication that the protesters, the rioters, the insurrectionists were festive people, many of whom were children and the elderly and overweight, who didn't seem like insurrectionists at all. Although what's the first rule of dealing with disinformation? It's that you create a truth sandwich, you foreground the truth, and then explain contrary to the lies that have been introduced by these bad actors. So, how is everybody today? Hope you're doing well, and hope you're interested in brainstorming solutions to the modern crisis of very determined, very entrenched, very bad faith actors who work to deceive people, who don't just create a culture war, but who weaponize vulnerable people's, intellectually vulnerable people. I don't mean vulnerable people as because they're particularly poor or badly off, but they're intellectually and emotionally vulnerable to grievance culture, to the idea, being attracted to the idea that people are exploiting them, that there is a global network of elites who are trying to keep them down and deny them their true destiny as Trump-like billionaires. They subscribe to the mythology of Trump as a billionaire. They don't engage with information about Trump inheriting over $400 million from his father and subsequently rorting the federal government in relation to taxes, rorting banks, etc. Greetings, Cosmic Rays. Nice to see you. Someone wants to ask if I think American politics is more blatantly corrupt than UK politics. Well, first of all, I don't like to overgeneralize about politics because I think corruption is concentrated in certain political parties at the present moment. I think it's generally healthy to have two viable political parties, but I think the Conservative Party in the UK and the Conservative Party in the US are very difficult to hold accountable because their public support is a function of Rupert Murdoch's ability to manipulate people. Rupert Murdoch's vision that using apostrophes, using quotation marks to undermine people is a powerful way to orchestrate emotional conscription. People who are exposed to a lot of that whole, it was alleged that so-and-so did this crime. The woman claims to have been raped and the woman alleges that she was raped. There's a redundancy in there that I'd like to draw your attention to. If in a headline, use the word alleged, means you're covering your legal basis. You've said alleged, you've given a jury exposure to the fact that the crimes are not established. No one's been convicted. So you say a woman alleges she was raped. If you subsequently put rape in quotation marks, you're forming an audience of people who disdain that woman because it's not just she's making allegations, but she's alleging that she was raped. There's an attached tone, and somebody more sophisticated than me or more disciplined in their writing and their philosophical musings may find a way to describe that describes the psychological process of creating an emotional army who go, women with their allegations of being raped. When will it end? When will it end? And this is not to say that I am a subscriber to the believe all women ideology. I'm very much for the process, for due process. Due process, particularly when it's not biased against women, which it can be, but biases can swing in either direction because public consensus is like a pendulum. It often roots for the underdog. Rupert Murdoch, who's the owner of Fox News, you may know, he creates an underdog by perpetually undermining his political opponents. And Rupert Murdoch's political opponents are the kind of people who don't support giving him subsidies to run his media empires, and who don't support propping up fossil fuel industries with billions of dollars worth of public money in subsidies. Hello, Paul. Mook is concerned that it's more subtle in the UK. Well, Donald Trump was certainly very performatively idiotic in a way that appealed to non-college educated voters. That was part of the fallout of meritocracy, the pursuit of meritocracy in the US. In the US, education is so prized by a broad subset of the population that people who didn't hop on board that education train can sometimes feel personally disparaged. And therefore there can be an underclass of resentment, particularly of religious people who feel that education is a powerful force of secularization. So they're like those uppity atheists are deconstructing religion, and they're deconstructing oppression in society, and they're undermining my accomplishments as a business owner who generates profit and lives out the American dream, and yet I'm supposed to think that I'm not as good as someone who's attended an Ivy League college. Part of that attitude fuels Joe Biden's success, because Joe Biden is the antithesis to Ivy League superiority complexes. Joe Biden didn't go to an Ivy League university, so he can at least act as a slight bridge between those in America who want the president to be well educated, but also those who want to be represented by someone who's sympathetic to their resentment towards Ivy League colleges. Trump was very adept at positioning himself as the archetypal anti-college person. He made spelling mistakes left, right, and center, spelling mistakes that he could have avoided if he turned on autocorrect, but he clearly sought to capitalize on the weaponization of class resentment, or education class resentment. So people saying, how dare the left criticize our representative, Donald Trump? He stands for us and for all the people who've been disdained and disparaged and left out because they didn't attend an Ivy League college or college at all. And when you criticize his spelling mistakes and say he's somehow less worthy, you're forgetting that his heart's in the right place, and he's the only person prepared to try and defend the United States by expending billions of dollars of public money on a wall that is a static form of defense that can be overcome by careful planning, and so isn't really particularly useful, but is a great allegory for our feelings of antipathy and animosity towards migration, towards the modern day system of meritocracy, whereby you let migrants come in and you let America benefit from that sustained entrepreneurial push from migrants who seek a better life for themselves and their children, who seek to maximize the opportunities of the United States. That anti-migrant sentiment is very potent, particularly when married with Confederacy nostalgia that says, hey, we used to have a lot of wealth in the South that was derived from being allowed to get away with slavery and profiting from the enslavement of other people. Why can't we have that again? Gosh darn North interfering with us, not letting us secede from the Union so that we could have slavery in an unchallenged fashion. The South is going to rise again, and we're going to reestablish Confederacy, and nobody's going to tell us off for being racist anymore, and nobody's going to stop us from recovering those systems of wealth building. So it's as if America's had two systems of building wealth. The first was slavery, and not only directly involved slave industries such as cotton picking, but associated industries in garment manufacture all began to generate huge amounts of profit, because profit levels, profit margins skyrocket when you don't have to pay for the most expensive component of producing something, which is labor. When you don't have to pay your workers, your ability to generate profit is much higher. And the South had that, and the South went to war in order to maintain that. And the South resented America's new method of generating high profits, which was to welcome migrants and the entrepreneurial skills and motivation, agricultural knowledge, and educational determination that they brought to the United States, which helped maintain the United States as a global superpower. So slavery created the wealth that drove America to global superpower status in the first place, but then overtly abolishing slavery and welcoming migrants was America's mostly successful method of changing course. But a lot of the dreams of abolishing slavery, a lot of the efforts of Reconstruction to have Union soldiers stationed in the South to help Southern people accept the new reality of it being illegal to enslave people and to persecute people because they were Black Americans rather than white. That was eventually undone, and Union forces had to withdraw from the South because of the rioting of white people during the Reconstruction era. And Huey points out that the new equal opportunity slavery is debt. Take a good look at it. It's much more profitable. It certainly is very profitable because, unlike in other industrialized nations, American students in debt are not charged simple interest, they're charged compounded interest. So people's debt becomes very swollen over time if they can't pay it off, because it's not just constant paying 4% on what you owe. The amount that you owe gets that unpaid interest added to that total, and then interest charged on the new lump sum, and that lump sum increases over time. So there's the principal that you owe, whatever you owed by virtue of getting your education, and then that swelling over time because of the nature of compounding interest. So that's a problem. And many white Americans who have taken on student debt can pay off that debt relatively easily because they find well-paying jobs. And a lot of that student debt is disproportionately large debt from master's degrees, from postgraduate degrees, and law degrees, and dentistry. Dentistry carries a lot of debt with it, and medical degrees. But there is still a level of education discrimination that is generally under-recognized by the general public. So it's harder to get a well-paying job if you are Black. There is still discrimination amongst employers. So it's harder for African American students to discharge that debt in a timely fashion, to take on the very well-paying jobs. Some of them can still get it. The exception doesn't disprove the rule. The rule is that it's just harder. It doesn't have to be an exact rule that applies to everybody. It applies in its random, hurtful nature, so that if you don't get the job, you can't be sure that it's discrimination that has deprived you of that opportunity, but you will always be tormented. Well, you may potentially be tormented by the possibility that people are treating you badly because of your skin color, and that your resume has gone straight to the bin because of your Black sounding name. So people have done some research on this. I'm not the most familiar with it, but I've been told by others who've engaged deeply with the issue that, there is substantial evidence to back up those assertions that I just made. In the human resources psychology sector. Oh, compound interest isn't taught in schools. Let's see if I can find a really short video then to explain compound interest better than I just did. Oh, good. There's a video to explain it in 1 minute.
Do you possess any one of these skills? Can you sing? Can you dance? Somebody who takes their knowledge, skills, expertise, puts them online, and
let's assume a very generous bank offers to pay John and Lisa a return of 10% per year, and they each invest $1,000 called the principal. John wants to spend the interest each year and only keep the principal in the bank, while Lisa wants to save for 30 years, so she doesn't take the interest out each year. In John's case, the 10% amount to $100 each year. So after 1 year, he'll have $1,100 in his account, out of which he'll take $100. After the second year, he'll once again have $1,100 in his account, out of which he'll take $100. After the 30th year, he'll have $1,100 as usual and take $100. He will be left with $1,000 in his account. So his principal and the returns he made amount to $100 multiplied by 30, so another $3,000. A grand total of $4,000 that he made over 30 years. Lisa, on the other hand, will make more. After 1 year, she will have $1,100 in her account, but she keeps everything there. After the second year, she will earn 10% of those $1,100, and not only on the initial $1,000. Therefore, she will have $1,100 plus $110, so $1,210. After the third year, she will earn 10% of those $1,210 and have $1,331. After year 30, she will have $17,449.40, over 4 times more than John.
All right. Now, that's not really compound interest in relation to student debt that I wanted, but it did show that over time there's a big difference to someone asks, what are you telling? Things, sir, I am telling things. For Confederate Republicans, freedom is simply what one can get by with. Cosmic Rose says the budget vote will probably be Friday and Saturday, hoping they can pass the $15 minimum wage. I'm hoping that they can pass the relief checks, and I think that really will be important. Yes. Marty Blue says the American divorce movement is happening on the ground in Colorado. What's the American divorce movement? Let me have a look at that. I'm familiar with it. Is that the secession movement that some Texas Republicans were talking about? So yes, we're excited about the omnibus spending bill. There may be some Republicans who vote for it. The Republican Party really is fracturing over the issues of how treasonous do we want to be and how much do we acknowledge that there's broad support amongst the American public for spending lots. The numbers stay consistent whether or not you're proposing a $2 trillion or a $4 trillion relief package. So just clearly a lot of Americans have managed to accommodate or embrace the idea that big is better. And that's good. That shows learning from 2008 when Obama and Biden felt the need to be conciliatory with Republicans and run a relatively more moderate stimulus package bill in order to bring on board more Republican buy-in. Biden has expressed that he understands the lesson from that. He regrets not having gone bigger and bolder with the stimulus package in 2008. He understands that the economic recovery was a function of how big the package was. So when the package wasn't that big, that slowed the pace of recovery, and it minimized the scale of the recovery. So there's no point trying to be conciliatory towards Republicans. You press ahead with every bit of power at your disposal, and you try and bring the public along with you as much as you can. Well, maybe you prefer that Biden should make student loans subject to simple interest rather than compound interest. And I'm going to leave those terms with you for you to look in. Oh, you still like the video? That's good. I'm glad you derived value from that video illustrating the difference between leaving more money in the bank and leaving yourself with a larger principal to earn interest on. Can leave you with a substantially different end amount. So even though Paul, who took out $100 each year to buy things, in the end had $3,000 worth of stuff that he bought, the lady who didn't take any money out of her savings account, because of the power of compound interest, had substantially more savings at the end of the process. Yes, the minimum wage is slightly more contentious just because of the pandemic and the pressure that small businesses are already under. And multiple small businesses have gone out of business because of the pandemic, and particularly the Trump approach to the pandemic, which was to worsen it in order to gain, to gamble on the prospect of winning the election by lying about the pandemic to his followers and to the world, so that in-person votes on the day of the election would skew Trump, would skew people who were relatively unafraid of catching COVID. So they would be happy to turn up, and that Biden voters would be more cautious and they would disbelieve Trump, and they would be more suspicious of voting in person, and they would be more likely to vote by mail, and that Trump could then profit from that by asking his co-conspirators in Republican state legislatures to ensure that in-person votes were counted first on the day of the election, and that Trump could then continue to spin a narrative of in-person votes counted first are the only legitimate votes, and the other ones are mysteriously coming later and are very suspicious, shouldn't count, clearly I won in a landslide, blah, blah, blah. Courts, give me the victory I want. Come on, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, you're going to grant me my election win, aren't you? Wait, you're not? Okay, what's my other asset? Crazily devoted supporters who think that I'll pardon them if it doesn't go right, but are reassured that they have the backing of the president to overthrow the government. Come on down, guys. Come to Washington, D.C. on the 6th of January. It'll be wild. You have to fight for your country if you want to have any country left at all. Okay, great. So lots of people are in the Capitol. They're smearing feces on the wall. They're hunting Mike Pence for not sending back the Electoral College votes to states and helping buy me time so I can use my corrupt new Department of Justice official who I might appoint as Attorney General, who will help me override the Georgian Electoral College votes and certification of those votes. Yeah? No, that's not working out? Okay, well, at least Republicans won't convict me, right? Because they know that I'll tell my supporters how horrible they are, incite some more stochastic terrorism against Republicans who vote against me. Yeah, that's going to work. Yeah, it's working. Good. I thought that would work. I'm so powerful. I'm so beloved. And then what shall I do? Okay, then I just keep telling people to keep telling the public that the election was stolen from me. March the 4th, sound good? Should we have a redo on that date? All right, we'll start charging $400 a night at my DC hotel because my supporters will want to stay there. Yep, so Ron Johnson's on board with that. Yep. Clarence Thomas, he's still in the Trump court. He's going to write in his judgments that the election was clearly contentious and that I really should have won. Yep. So we've still got like 70% of Republicans believing that I won the election. That seems good. That seems like a powerful number of people. It's higher amongst OAN viewers. Yep, well, of course. They don't give any time to naysayers like Pete Buttigieg. They're more committedly brainwashed in my favor. Yep. Absolutely. I completely agree that the minimum wage not being $15 is insanity. And relatively speaking, it should be $27 if you wanted it to keep pace with inflation and productivity over time. I'm just saying that it has to be managed in the context of a economic recession so that it doesn't intensify small business failure. So there has to be adequate government supports put in place, which is a difficult business, but that has to be contrived so that American communities don't experience sudden negative shocks to their system. So agree that $15 wage is important, but it also has to be approached judiciously. Yeah. Minimum wage earners not only suffer from having a non-livable wage that often impels them to have more than one job in order to just tread water financially, but economic research in the last day or so that's been published indicates that there is more labor law violations in those poorly paid industries. So if you have a poorly paid job, your boss is more likely to see you as disposable and to break the law, to abuse you, and you'll be less likely to feel that you have power or recourse to oppose that breaking of the law. Your self-esteem may be badly affected by conflating that low wage that you earn with your self-worth. So that the very low minimum wage is conceivably a self-fulfilling prophecy of self-destructive behavior as well. If you put that psychological dampener on a whole subset of the population so that they feel they're worthless, they're subject to punitive fines for not having enough money in the bank, they're unable to have enough capital to purchase household items outright, such as a fridge or freezer or car, and then they are more likely to be exploited by gouging rental industries. Yes, it's very socially destructive to have unlivable wages. Pushback is one thing, Cosmic Rose. I'm arguing that it will cause family breakdowns and family problems if you don't orchestrate policy changes to support small businesses that may go out of business. Small businesses also employ people. So yes, I understand that Americans have been oppressed for too long by Republicans making the argument that the $15 minimum wage should never happen because it's not the right thing at all. And I'm certainly not subscribing to that point of view. I think the 15 minimum wage is a minimum thing. I'm just still arguing that there is a need for support mechanisms to be instituted at the same time. So I'm not suggesting I'll postpone it forever or postpone it for a decade or even a year, just some time to make sure there's a bill that contains, or what Biden's trying to do at the moment, which is adapt the PPP program so that it is more guaranteed to benefit small businesses rather than larger businesses, like Shake Shack. Shake Shack gave back the $10 million PPP money they received from the government after the public learned that Shake Shack, a large chain restaurant, had been given so much money, because that's not a small business. All right. What else are we going to look at? Some people got a little bit, oh, I haven't said hello to Alan yet. Or Phil. Look, Phil's there too. Nice to see you. All right. Should we listen to Tucker Carlson? Yes. This is why I'm still not using HAPS as much yet, because I can't give up StreamYard's great function of being able to play clips.
So it's worth finding out where the public is getting all this false information, this disinformation, as we'll call it. So we checked. We spent all day trying to locate the famous QAnon, which in the end we learned is not even a website. If it's out there, we could not find it. So it's worth finding out where the public is getting all this false information, this disinformation, as we'll call it. So we checked. We spent all day trying to locate the famous QAnon, which in the end we learned is not even a website. If it's out there, we could not find it. So it's worth finding out where the public is getting all this false information.
Yeah. So I was a bit lost in the comment section there, but that was Tucker Carlson. Huey's backing up my point there. The big business swooped in and took all of the PPP. The way it was dispersed by the Trump administration was to say that the loans could be dispersed through big banks which were less likely to have lent money to small African-American owned businesses, for example, and to small businesses in general. So it was weighted towards big businesses that already had big pre-existing relationships with big banks. So that's why there needs to be a little bit of time given to help the Biden team uncorrupt those programs to disperse public funds. Tucker definitely is a critical fountain of disinformation. He's racist, and some people might say, oh, he's just spouting disinformation for money, but it's likely that he's also just an ingrained racist. This is an important point that one of Tucker Carlson's top writer ended up being outed as being an active member of popular QAnon message boards such as 4chan and 8chan. So Tucker here is lying. Listen to this barefaced lie from Tucker that they couldn't find any such thing as QAnon, that it's mythical because there's not a QAnon website.
So it's worth finding out where the public is getting all this false information, this disinformation, as we'll call it. So we checked. We spent all day trying to...
yeah, that's what we heard. Okay. See, I wasn't paying attention properly, but they checked. They looked for QAnon. They couldn't even find it. It's not real. Well, it's certainly not real in terms of it's not true. It's a powerful, internationally far-reaching cult that capitalizes on vulnerable people, many of whom spent longer on their computers because they were in lockdown, groomed them by exposing them to very distressing images and information about child abuse, and then introduced them to what's essentially the new Elders of Zion anti-Semitic conspiracy, pretending that child trafficking is primarily a function of Hollywood elites and Democrats and Jewish people, such as George Soros. That's just their way of putting a gloss on the fact that it's fundamentally the new outsiders are threatening our children. QAnon supporters pulled their children out of school after Joe Biden's victory. Time magazine ran an article prior to the election in which some QAnon supporters said that they intended to gas themselves to die with their children in a car from carbon monoxide poisoning if Joe Biden won, because they felt it would be that calamitous to have the Democratic candidate succeed, because they believed all of these very extreme ideas about how all of the child trafficking that occurs in the world is concentrated in an arrangement between Democrats and Hollywood and Jewish people who they often resent for being allies of Black Americans and migrants. And it is true, many Jewish activists have worked to advance civil rights and have worked to advance the rights of refugees and migrants, because Jewish people often understand the challenges of being a migrant, and they often know very personally how much migrants can contribute to a society they've joined. How powerful is the motivating force of gratitude? We heard that a little bit yesterday when I played Merrick Garland's speech discussing how he wanted to give back, what a privilege it was to be in a hearing for the position of Attorney General, given that his grandparents had fled persecution. Yes, globalist is a euphemism for Jews in the anti-Semitic ideology of QAnon. Yeah, it's speculation, but I'm happy to find common ground and agree with you on that, Boston Tea Party. I think it's unlikely that Epstein killed himself, or at least that he killed himself without help. I think it's reasonably likely that Bill Barr gave him an opportunity to do so by ensuring that the cameras were sabotaged, because all of the cameras outside Jeffrey Epstein's cell were not working. And whilst some degree of incompetence and breakdown, systemic breakdown, is to be expected in prisons in America, which are often poorly maintained, yes, I'm not with you if you're going to try and promote the idea that Hillary Clinton secretly controls New York prisons. William Barr is the Attorney General of the United States, someone whose father, Donald Barr, employed Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein dropped out of college. He employed Epstein as a mathematics teacher at a privileged, expensive private school in New York called Dalton School. Donald Barr also wrote some very contentious science fiction involving a castle where lots of young people were raped. Jeffrey Epstein was a teacher who was renowned for wearing inappropriate clothing with coats with open necks and flirting with students. But Donald Barr didn't fire him. I think a subsequent principal fired him. And lots of Trump affiliated people went on to help Jeffrey Epstein avoid the challenges of a substantial prison sentence. They helped him have a sweetheart deal when he was convicted of child sex trafficking, so that only the oldest claimant, the oldest victim, had her claims included in the charges. So she was 16, but the other claimants were younger, and they didn't find out till after Epstein was convicted in a plea deal that their claims had not been processed as part of the deal. Epstein was convicted for 18 months and got to spend a substantial amount of that time on day release programs, where he would get to go to his office during the day and return to sleep in a private wing of the prison at nighttime, accompanied by detectives who weren't dressed as police officers, but who were dressed in suits and who spoke to Epstein, who addressed him as Sir. And other people have said that Epstein, in his day release at his office, was visited by a succession of young women. So essentially, he was still trafficking in young women whilst serving a prison time for trafficking in young women. So yes, there's lots of contentious things about Epstein's death. I still think you should be barred from this platform, Boston Tea Party, because I think your contributions are likely to be malevolent and disruptive. And I don't think you're here in good faith to learn or benefit from this program or engage in a positive way. Look how many powerful people were associated with the Playboy Mansion. Yes, and that's a kernel of truth that helps the QAnon folk feel that they have some basis for being very suspicious of people. It's just that their suspicions are not concentrated on just powerful people. Their suspicions are concentrated on powerful people who are Jewish and people associated with Jewish people. So whilst Jews are definitely represented in the ranks of criminals and people involved with criminal conduct, there is no worldwide Elders of Zion conspiracy to harm Christian children. That was the conspiracy theory that helped compel Hitler to write his predatory, exploitative texts exploiting abraded German egos that had been taught to believe in German exceptionalism, were taught to believe that the outcome of the First World War was stolen from them by Jewish people, and to help incite Germans into a frenzy over this lie sold to them over and over again, that they didn't lose the First World War, that it was stolen from them by Jews and communists. And for people who were worried why I was posted something that was rude to communists yesterday, not to victim blame, but communism was used as a significant part of the anti-Semitic justifications that Hitler and fascism generally came up with to brainwash populations or to conscript support from German and European populations to say, yep, communism's clearly terrible and Jews are secretly running communism. Some Jewish people were. Leon Trotsky was Jewish. Stalin wasn't Jewish. So over-extrapolating from the presence of some Jews to mass brainwash, or to attempt to mass brainwash populations with the idea that it's Jewishness that's the problem, that Jewishness is responsible for communism. It's not true. Karl Marx was Jewish as well, yes. But people who can force you to believe absurdities can help you commit atrocities. And the absurdity is believing that Judaism is a subset of communism. It's not true. Communists are just communist people who've fallen in love with the idea that the right answer to injustices in the world is to advocate and agitate for a new form of government in which the people replace the wealthy people. So working people replace wealthy people in positions of power. You have to seize the means of production. You have to eat the rich. You have to kill off the wealthy class in order to restore justice. And that's a violent ideology. People start to subscribe to it when they've been whipped up into a frenzy over real travesties and injustices that exist in the world. But it's not a reasonable approach, and it leads to very violent and destructive outcomes. Communism all over the world is associated with a concentration of power in an executive branch that becomes ruthless, exploitative, unaccountable, and usually murderous at a mass scale. A lot of Bernie Sanders supporters are seduced by QAnon conspiracy as well, because they were already subject to the conspiracy theories that were rife amongst Sanders supporters, that things were stolen from Bernie, that he would have won the primary election in 2016, but it was stolen from him. Russian agents trying to weaken American democracy, they were part of that psychological warfare against Americans, against targeted Bernie Sanders supporters, to use their predilection for believing that Bernie Sanders was the greatest by telling them, yes, you're right. We're playing into your confirmation bias. Sanders is the greatest. He definitely would have won on the merits if it were not for the nefarious forces of women like Hillary Clinton and her supporters stealing things from him. So it might be hard, considering Sanders is a secular Jew, to realize that QAnon, Bernie Sanders supporters can, a subset of them can morph into QAnon folks, but it's just conspiratorial thinking that can metastasize. Back in a second. Hello. Yes. Oh, that's a good analogy. The crazy wick burns at both ends. Some people call it the horseshoe theory. How do we help support non-craziness? How do we mobilize decency and sanity? We just keep talking. We keep being supportive of people who earn low wages. We reinforce the humanity of people who earn low wages. They deserve $15 minimum wage an hour and more. And hello, darling. Hi. I'm just broadcasting, but I won't be long. All right. Oh, yes, Dershowitz and Trump. I forgot to draw that connection as well when we were discussing Epstein. So, yes, I think one of the attractions of Bernie Sanders was that he dignified the working class in America. I think he's blinded a bit towards focusing on the sadness of white working class people, which excludes the fact that a lot of Black Americans are working class. A lot of people of color are working class. It's just that the white working class often have an additional sense of grievance in that they feel that they're entitled to the wealth of the United States. And look, they're entitled to more in that they're right that there's definitely been undue oppression of working class people. The gap between low incomes and high incomes has risen to an increasing extent since Ronald Reagan. Yes. Look, I can show you from the Brookings Institute. Brookings. Because this might surprise people a little bit. Because we're used to hearing about research in which Black Americans are more badly off. But Hispanic Americans have the highest life expectancy, and Black Americans are often happier in various measures. So this was published on February the 27th, 2020, which you might remember as being just pre-general awareness of COVID. So the author of this is Carol Graham, who, I should look her up. She's got a Twitter account. C.G. Brookings. Okay. Research shows a large gap in optimism amongst poor communities, particularly between Black and white groups. One of my studies found that poor Black people were 3 times as likely to be higher up on an optimism scale than poor white people, and poor Hispanic individuals were about 1.5 times more likely as poor whites to be optimistic. Poor Black people are also half as likely to report stress the previous day than poor white people. We also know objectively that they are more resilient to that stress. Despite facing discrimination, a lower life expectancy, and higher mortality rates, minorities today have continued to make gradual progress in narrowing the gap with white Americans in areas including mortality and education. The US is the only wealthy country in the world with a rising mortality rate. This is partly due to deaths of despair or the huge increase in premature deaths amongst less than college-educated, middle-aged white people. Now, I can't say I have research to back me up, but if white people, middle-aged white people, are suffering from a huge increase in premature death, we can potentially look at psychological reasons for that. It's not discrimination against white people. It's grievance culture is bad for your health. Feeling badly done by and watching Fox News tell you over and over again that you need to vote for Republicans because Democrats in power are trying to steal from you and give your birthright away to Black Americans, that's a message that harms your health. It harms your mental health, and that ultimately harms your physical health because the two are interconnected. Your nephew used to work for the Brookings Institute. That's exciting. We haven't had one of these for so long. Look, it's kind of exciting just because of its rarity right now. Like, very few MAGA people have trolled this broadcast since the insurrection. Like, yes, what were you doing on January the 6th, little troll person? Are you in Moldova? I hear their economy isn't doing that well. Huey thinks that Black America needs to exercise the power that they have politically in this moment. I agree. And I think the Biden-Harris administration is on board, that they are asking all government agencies to consider how best to maximize, to counteract the forces of exclusion and discrimination, and to maximize opportunities for Black Americans. And that there's potentially more public sympathy for that position now. Fox is still selling a false understanding to white viewers, selling an understanding that white Americans are being denied their birthright by migrants, by Black Americans, that there's affirmative action that will rob them of what they deserve and what they have earned by virtue of their skin color and their inherited from their ancestors. So funny, because Republican ideology often claims to be very much a believer in the power of the individual. But at the same time, that's a cover story that hides the fact that there's clearly a lot of Republicans that don't believe in the power of the individual, that believe in the hereditary power of whiteness. Absolutely. I've argued that very strongly for a long time, that Black America is the backbone of the Democratic Party in a voting sense. They're the most reliable voting bloc. So white people still are often the focus of outreach efforts because of the electoral college system and the way that functions as affirmative action for white voters, white working class voters who help tip the balance in swing states. But when people pander to white voters and forget that maximizing Black voter turnout is critical to election outcomes, then they do things like run an all-white ticket, which I think was prejudicial to the success of the Hillary Clinton ticket in 2016. Strategists obviously advised Hillary Clinton that she had to appoint a white man to be her running mate in order to help mitigate the hatred that many white men felt for her, that they had been cultivated to feel by people like Rush Limbaugh, who spent decades just pairing Hillary Clinton's name with negative adjectives over and over again. So not evidence of anything wrong she had done, just perpetually trying to create a negative association, successfully, for many working class white men. So the idea for Hillary Clinton was that, many people understood that Donald Trump was a fake, an overhyped businessman who had a string of business failures associated with his name, and who was not well educated, and who didn't support migration, didn't support America's minority communities, and would exercise a deleterious effect on social cohesion. Many Americans understood that, but many Americans could also not bring themselves to overcome that cultivated animosity that they'd been taught to feel for Hillary Clinton over decades of deriding her and just pairing her name with all manner of negative qualities. Black America is largely the conservative side of the Democrats, but they're still extremely likely to vote for Democratic candidates. And progressives on the left, white progressives, often underestimate that level of conservatism, and therefore were very surprised when Biden began to win primary elections in states that weren't demographically white dominant. So Iowa and New Hampshire, demographically white dominant. The rest of America is not like that. And South Carolinian voters helped reveal to the world that Black voters are pragmatic and rational and conservative, and they voted for the more moderate candidate in that primary race, who was Joe Biden. All right, folks. Well, I think it's been lovely to chat, and I will go. Huey, lovely to talk to you. Alan, lovely to see you as always. Birdman, interesting. Cosmic Rose, I'm excited about your nephew. That was cool. And yes, we're all looking forward to Merrick Garland's confirmation. He's had his second day of hearings. What's the demographics of Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina? Black Americans are moving south. Why are they moving south? Because it's cheaper. It's warmer. They're not in Texas. But I think perhaps there's more hope now. If Georgia can become a blue state, perhaps that will attract more migrants from northern states who now realize they can make a difference. That when there are powerful community organizers like Stacey Abrams, they can be energized and use their power to overcome the challenges of corrupt practices such as redistricting and gerrymandering to Republican advantage. Thanks, cool photo. Lovely to see you. Moving south to where their grandparents came from. True, but surely that's not enough of a motivation in and of itself to revisit ancestral lands. It must be because there's some hope associated with those states now, or some environmental circumstances that facilitate raising a family or building a life. Yes, agreed. QAnon is not mentally healthy. It's a violent cult. Not that everybody who belongs to it is violent, but they are all somewhere on a continuum of people believing absurdities who may then be capable of committing atrocities. I think a predictably large subset of QAnon people would be prepared to attack others, because the stakes are very high in a cult. You have to support the cult leader or the world will collapse. That tends to be the extremist nature of evolving cult thought. If I ever visit Detroit, I will hear echoes of Mississippi and Alabama. Detroit is in Michigan. Alan says, great broadcast. Don't forget patreon.com/davchat, which is true. I'm counting my growing numbers of Patreon supporters. You can become a Patreon for $2 an hour, $2 a month, not $2 an hour. It's not a subscription-only service. The service is still available regardless of whether you join or not. But if you become a member of my group of Patreons, then you are contributing towards increasing the breadth and reach of this broadcast. So if that's something you support and it would bring you joy to do that, that's the link to follow. Yes. Well, evidently, people would have moved away from the South initially. The South, particularly after the failures of Reconstruction, when Reconstruction was cancelled to a large degree, then people moved away from the South because the South then didn't have any Union soldiers placed there anymore to stop white people in the South from lynching and harming and brutalizing Black communities and burning their churches and buildings. There are many massacres or riots occasioned by aggrieved white people who feared a loss of birthright, what they perceived to be their birthright. So, of course, there was a migration away from the South, and the violence inherent in Southern attitudes of racism, of hostile anti-Blackness. All right, so I'm underestimating the power of cultural roots in the Black community. Sure, but if people moved away from the South to begin with, doesn't that mean there's been some lessening of those factors that is reassuring people enough so that they move back to the South now? So I'm just asking for more analysis of what's happening there, of what is changing in the South to reassure people that they can reconnect back to their cultural roots. So you're going to retire in North Carolina even though you weren't born in the South. Oh, that's interesting. That does suggest a very powerful reach of cultural roots. You want to go back to the South even though you weren't born there. Cool. You'll retire in North Carolina. See, I still feel like there's racism in the South that would be a push away factor rather than a pull factor. But clearly there's very strong pull factors that we could discuss on another time. Now you're talking about the pull factors: lower cost of living, less hustle, and growing political power. There you go. That's what I wanted. Growing political power as illustrated by Stacey Abrams, and lower cost of living, yes. Less gentrification. Whereas tech companies that are powerful economic generators but do raise the cost of living in cities and communities where they take hold. Those are push away factors from northern states. All right, folks. Cool. Cosmic Rose asks people to smash the like button and increase the reach of my broadcasts. True. I've heard that Boston actually has the reputation for being the most racist city in the United States. And there's the Boston Globe did an expose in which the average family wealth of a Black family in Boston was $3 relative to the average wealth of a white family in Boston, which was $100,000. And so that extraordinary disparity, $3, you think it's a mistake, but it wasn't. That was profiled on Trevor Noah's show. There was one of those reporters that visited Boston. So they interviewed a lot of white people who said they didn't think there was a problem with racism in Boston, but they were all white. They were all like, oh no, I've never experienced a problem with racism. But the fact that they were white and felt themselves to be an authority on the subject of whether or not there was anti-Black racism in Boston indicated that they were too confident in a way that implies blindness to racism, which is often a feature of racism. Alan says, make sure you check the power grid before we move. Yes, that's important. I will move to Boston and help change minds. Thank you. Yeah, I won't let them change mine. I've been immersed for too long in American political discussions on Twitter that have helped grow and shape my understanding of the world. And I think, like a shark, I will swim only forwards and not backwards on that issue. Yeah. Yeah, well, the pull factor, as you said, Huey, of lower cost of living, together with cultural pull factors to invite people to consider returning to the South, even if they weren't born there. Bring a heavy coat, absolutely. All right. Thanks, folks. Take care, all the best. And don't forget, our vigilance is still required because Trump is out of office. But look, let's hope that the authorities are preparing for whatever might come on March the 4th. We all knew that there might be violence on January the 6th, but as it turns out, people working for Trump or appointed by Trump or sympathetic to Trump may have been key in sabotaging an effective response to the violence of Trump supporters on that day. So I'll never forget the role of Acting Secretary Christopher Miller of the Pentagon. So Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller, who wrote a memo forbidding the National Guard in DC to wear protective helmets or body armor or carry batons or arrest Trump supporters, or there was invisible shackles put on the National Guard. We're going to hopefully find more about the actions of the Sergeant at Arms of the House and the Sergeant at Arms of the Senate, who both reassured officials that every precaution had been taken to protect the Capitol and to protect legislators in the Capitol, which wasn't true. Wasn't true at all. So hopefully Americans are able to learn more about what happened there. Exactly. We won't drop our guard. Bye, Alan. Thank you. Okay, so Lawrence did a good segment about Stacey Abrams and somebody else. Okay. What does it mean when you say some recent article, Dav, please research? If you don't think I spend most of my day researching this stuff, then you're probably mistaken, even if my research doesn't perfectly overlap with what you research. But I will give that Lawrence last word segment a check, because I do very much support Stacey Abrams. If anybody recalls, my broadcast from prior to the election frequently featured Stacey Abrams' organization, fairfight.com. Cheers, everybody. Take care. All the best.